All right, welcome back. We now have Craig Barr, who's going to be taking us through some workflows inside of Mudbox 2013. So, Craig, take it away.
Thanks, Sean. Hi guys, we're gonna take a look at Mudbox 2013 and specifically some hard surface sculpting workflows, and we'll take a look at how we can use Mudbox in conjunction with Maya to achieve some of that as well. So the first thing we're going to start out with here is this simple base mesh. You'll see with the wireframe here, it's sitting at around 400 polys. This is just my simple base mesh that just using the poly tools in Maya to build. And what we'll do here is I'll just step up a couple of levels of subdivision to around 100,000 polys, and we'll start to rough in some of the forms. The end goal is this guy here. So from this simple base mesh, I want to sculpt up and get some of these hard surface forms in there. So there you can see the base mesh wireframe over top of that. And so we're taking them from around 400 polys up to about 8 million polys to get some of these details. And then we're going to do something interesting with that where we actually go backwards and rebuild our subdivision levels to give us a nice start for a base mesh to generate normal maps and even use that for a retopo workflow through Maya or Max or whatever else it is you may want to use. So let's jump in there and take a look at how that's achieved. So with the tools here, I should point out that the UI in Mudbox 2013 is now fully customizable. So if you go underneath the window here, you can turn off the lock layout, and you can start to tear off any of these panes. You can leave them as floating windows, or you can start to dock them wherever you want them to be. So for example, my viewport filters here, if I wanted to move that to another area or leave it floating, I'm going to start to tear that off and bring that in. My material presets, maybe I want that over there, whatever it may be. And you can save those presets and share them. So in a production pipeline, that's pretty handy to have custom preset for UI layouts that artists may prefer to use and be able to share with each other. Here's a sculpting specific one as well. Then I've just created a painting specific one that I prefer to work with. So nothing sculpt related in here. I always have the color wheel available, and my paint layer is always in view as well. So for this though, I'm just going to reset right back to the start and lock that so I don't tear anything off in the middle of this. And as well with the customizable UI, I always like to change where my brush position is here. So if I just middle click, I can drag and drop any of these tools. And the reason why I want to do that is that any tray that you're in a Mudbox, the numbers are work as hotkeys for the order of those tools. So for example, if I hit number 1, I'm at the number 1 tool in this tray, which happens to be Sculpt. And typically for hard surface stuff, I'm going to work with stuff like flatten, wax, scrape, and pinch, and maybe bulge to a certain extent. But what we'll do here now is let's start off with the wax tool. Underneath my fall off, I want to make sure I have this kind of sharpened edge fall off. And the reason why I want that is that as I'm working with symmetry here, let's just put a sculpt layer there that I can work in. I can start using these forms to kind of give me a bit of a more defined area. And I'm using that sharpened edge so that I can see kind of the area of the forms. At this point, I don't really care much at all about the refined area. I'm just building in the overall kind of armor torso that we saw in that image. So I'm just really concerned with the overall basis, the forms of this character, this model as I go. And we'll build up these kind of shoulders on here. So as I do this, so you can see that I have all these different layers of sculpting that's happening up here. I can reveal as we go along to show the process. I'll just quickly build in these forms. So as I use this wax brush, you'll notice that the wax tool works in a way that it's the sense, the idea behind the tool is that you're accumulating clay. So it's kind of like you're adding clay to it. You can see with each stroke, I'm getting that kind of non-disturbed surface. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's grab the sculpt brush. If I grab the sculpt tool and I try to do what I'm doing there, the sculpt tool isn't going to pile up as much. You're going to get that kind of destructive geometry there. The sculpt tool is really powerful for certain other details that we're going to get into here a bit later. But for building up these forms, wax is an excellent place to start. And just to show, for working up, especially if you're working in something organic, you can put stamps on any of these tools here, and I can start to get kind of that raking kind of effect here if I wanted to build up some muscle mass or different forms like that. But in this case here, I'm more interested in non-organic. We're getting into some kind of flat surface. Let's take that right off there. Actually, let's just reveal some building up of the basic forms. So at this point here, we're only working at 100,000 polys. I'm just building up those basic forms as to the overall shape or concept of this model. And then what I want to do is if I step up another level here, we're subdividing, so we're multiplying that by 4. We're up to around 470,000 polys here at this point. And this is where I want to start to refine everything a little bit. So with this, I can start to use tools like my flatten tool here. I'm just going to turn something off, and we'll show that in a moment here. So with the flatten tool, again, I want to use that hardened kind of edge fall off that I'm working with. And this is where I can really start to define any of those kind of hardened edges and rotate around, start to tumble around to get those kind of edges that I want to define this plating on the armor. So I'll just quickly start to rub that in. And then I'm using the Shift hotkey at any time to smooth out the middle of that plating there so that I'm not getting any kind of roughened areas in there. I can kind of smooth that out. So another nice thing with this flatten tool, if I go down to the advanced settings in any of our tools, I can turn on Orient to Surface. So before I turn that on, you'll notice that right now I'm just working from my view. So essentially a 2D plane view, right? It's constrained to my view, which is very handy to have. But if I want to work on something like these corner edges here, hitting Orient to Surface is going to follow the topology now of the geometry. So this is really handy when I get into this area here and start to kind of refine with my flatten brush. Without rotating the view, I can see how that surface on the other side is going to affect that edge that I'm working on here. And at this point, I'm no magic going on. I'm just doing a lot of polishing, a lot of kind of flatten tool to get that hard edging going in. And then we can start to step up. Here, let's reveal some of this here. I have some kind of like organic kind of under skin or under armor going on. That's just using the foamy brush to build up underneath. And then what we want to do is start to refine this a little bit more here. So stepping up another level of subdivision, this is where we can start to do some really interesting things and use a couple of different tools. So for example, with the sculpt tool, what I might want to do here is use some of the stamps to get these edging in. So let me show, first of all, a couple processes here. We can use the pinch tool to achieve some of that, and the pinch tool is going to really sharpen up those edges, going to really tighten it up and give us that nice tightened feel. But there's also a couple of other ways that we can achieve hard surface edging here. One of them is using the sculpt tool in conjunction with vector displacement mapping. Vector displacement mapping has a much higher advantage over regular traditional displacement mapping in the way that it will preserve accurate precision from the geometry that these maps were created from. You also get undercuts and overhangs, things that a typical displacement map will just cut down to and is not interested in, or it can't achieve that. Vector displacement being 32 bits will actually get curves underneath. So for example, before I start to refine that edge, let's take a look at something that shows that quite nicely. So if I take this undercut bevel vector displacement and drive it in as a stamp, while we're in here in the image browser in Mudbox does handle 32-bit floating point images, so HDR and EXR images. I can adjust the exposure in here. This is what vector displacement looks like. It's this very strange kind of red and green and yellow hues, and that represents anything that's above surface and undercut. So in this case here with this stamp, just bring that in here. I'm just going to show this at a larger scale as to how that might work. Let's grab a simple new sculpt layer. And if I carve through this surface using my steady stroke to allow me a little bit of lead off so I can get a little more accuracy on that, just to show what is happening here, if I climb underneath, as I stroke there, I'm actually cutting into and underneath that surface. So I'm not just pushing down, I'm also pushing out. So this is great for defining the armor in here. I have another one that is just a simple little edge that I can use this undercut bevel. We'll use that. And if I bring the brush size down, I keep my steady stroke on. There we go. And then what I can do is begin to cut underneath my armor there. So what am I doing here with that? Well, this vector displacement stamp is actually not just pushing down, but it's cutting underneath the actual armor plating. So I'm getting that effect of kind of an overhang of my geometry. Another thing that we can do here with this that's really handy, back to this edge, I have something like a simple corner. If I bring that in as a stamp, this is just a simple sharp corner that I can take, and using my steady stroke on there again, that's going to allow me that lead off to just start to define that. That's much too strong. Let's take the overall strength of that down a bit. And there you can see I'm getting these nice sharpened kind of edges, and in conjunction with my flatten brush once again, I can really start to get that flattened area in there. So we're really starting to work up these hardened precision edges on here. I should point out with the flatten brush, of course, any of these tools, I can throw a stamp down the flatten brush. I can throw a square stamp on to help me get or achieve a sharper edge. But back to the a different workflow, we looked at using flatten in conjunction with smoothing. We've looked at using the pinch tool to achieve a sharpened area there, and vector displacement to achieve sharpened areas. We've also added in Mudbox 2013 the ability to use curves. So let me grab a whole new area on this guy. And this is a really nice way to work here. With curves, what I can do is, let me just give myself a little bit more lead time on the steady stroke there. With these curves, I can paint out, I'm going to turn the mirroring off actually for that, and refine this area. I can start to paint in or draw in curves that are going to stick to the topology of the surface. So to illustrate that, if I go around the shoulder here, it's going to give me that arc around there. And the nice thing about it is it's going to give me this little orange circle to ask if I want to continue that curve. So this is really nice to be able to just go around a surface like that and build that. We also have these simple smooth curve tools that allow you to kind of smoothen out your overall curve. And these are really useful for things like defining these hardened edges again. So with that sculpt tool that we were using, I can take that same stamp I was working with, and if I grab my sculpt brush, bring it down into here, I can do a thing here, like I can right click and say stroke on curve, or you'll notice that as I move my brush around, it's locking to that curve. So I could just grab that curve and just start to stroke right across that, definitely locked completely to that curve. Or if I right click and hit stroke on curve, it's just going to, let me turn the strength up so we can see that maybe a little bit more. Just over exaggerate it a bit and turn the curve off. So we'll hide all our curves. Now I've used that guide curve to essentially define that edge to work there. And then I can just keep going along here with my kind of flatten and polish kind of effect. Let's reveal some of these more kind of finished areas here. Step up another level of subdivision on this guy. So here's more refining going on. We're just defining more of the sculpting surfaces on here. And if I jump up to the top level of subdivision here at level 7, this is where we get up to 8 million polys, and I'm starting to get into some really tight details along the head and the face. And then if I hit show all, we have a couple of other little pieces that are added to this character on here. So we have this kind of antenna, these tubes and these pipes, and these little hardened surfaces here. Let's turn off the curves, hide all the curves that I use there. And these were achieved in a couple of interesting ways. So this cylinder, I just jumped into the Mudbox community and I went to the library, and we have a bunch of different base meshes up in there, and I grabbed, there's a bunch of different cylinders and different shapes in there. And if you grab that cylinder, you can drive it right into your viewport. And then I use the pose tools and the pose tray to actually deform that model to give it that shape of these little pipes or tubes from this character here. But some of these other little pieces in here were achieved by just sending the mesh over to Maya. So let's do that. I'm going to isolate my model here by just right-clicking on it. Let's step down. With everything displayed, I want all the different sculpt layers displayed, but I'm going to step it down to a lower level of subdivision. Now we're only at 29,000 polys, but you can see that we have that basic shape. So this is light enough to work with easily in Maya, but it's also giving me the details that I want to work with. So if I select that model and we just hit send to Maya, I already have a Maya scene open, so I'm just going to go add selected to current scene. It's going to ask me, do I want the base mesh or that resolution I'm working with? I want the resolution I'm currently working with. So it's going to bring it over here into Maya, and I now have that live connection. You can see that in the right-hand corner. The green it's connected to Mudbox live between Maya and Mudbox in here. So what we can do with this now is I can start to work with these different little pieces on here. So just to show what's happening here with this guy, using the number 3 hotkey in Maya, I'm going to display the hard creased edges that I've defined. You can see these bold borders on here. I just used this simple crease tool and went in and defined those borders to preserve those all the way up. Well, Mudbox now supports creasing and hard edges from Maya, Max, and Softimage. So it's really nice workflow to build little pieces and just kind of start to work with them in conjunction with your geometry here. So we'll just kind of wedge that in there for now. And then we have this other interesting way to work in Maya. And then I'm using this simple little base emblem that I want to apply to the shoulder. And all that's going on there is I'm using, I have a little shelf button up here, but underneath the mesh menu, transfer attributes. If I open that up, I'm going to turn on vertex position. And the reason why I'm turning that on is that that's going to allow me to kind of smash this piece of geometry into my base or into my mesh there and move it around so that I'm actually effectively modeling based off of another surface. So let's do that. If I hit apply, oh, I actually have to grab my mesh here. So let's grab the mesh, hit apply. Whoops, wrong way. Grab that mesh, grab that guy, hit apply. There we go. So what happened there was it took the entire base mesh and smashed it to that little emblem. I don't want that. I want this emblem kind of carved into it here. If I turn the wireframe off and put the shading on here, there we go. Or maybe we do want that on in here a bit. So if you can see it on the screen here now, that's going to allow me to actually stretch it around, position it on the model. So I'm actually deforming that mesh based off of the underlying character model, and I can scale it up to fit that. And then once I'm happy with that, the first thing I want to do is delete the history off that so it's freed from the base mesh there. I froze the transformations on it as well. And then I'm just going to take this guy and hide him away. And then we can just do a quick extrude on there. So if we just grab a simple extrude, and we'll just do something quick here like this, bring up some subdivisions on there. I have another one here that's actually already finished here. And the only difference there is I've defined those hard edges, so there's creasing there. And this is where I can start to grab these objects here and send them back to Mudbox. So we have that live connection. If I go to Mudbox here and add back to my current sculpting session here in Mudbox, this is just telling me that that piece I just created doesn't have any UVs on it. That's fine. Don't need UVs in Mudbox anyways. You can use a UV-less painting workflow in here as well if you want. So there's our little piece kind of hammered to the edge of the model here. So if I take that model and I start to subdivide that up, you'll see that I'm getting that nice smooth creased edge. And what's happening here with this little piece, that simple little lightweight piece that we brought over, you can see it's really low res. I want to preserve those hard edges I created, and that's happening underneath the mesh add new subdivision level here. Let's go into the options. You'll see there's those new options here to preserve hard edges, crease hard edges, preserve creasing. So with that on by default and selecting this mesh here, I can subdivide that up, and you can see that it's preserving those overall hard edges rather than just rounding them out. So let's step back up with this mesh here. And before we jump into some texture painting on this guy here, I want to show something that's kind of a really neat workflow here in Maya. And what that is I'm at the top level, subdivision level, with all of the detail that I've sculpted in on this character. If we turn on our cavity ambient occlusion, that helps bring up all that detail in there. You can see that with all of the detail on this 8 million resolution poly mesh, we can do something interesting. You remember the simple kind of blobby form that I started out with at the beginning? Well, that's going to be difficult to grab the normal maps or the vector displacement details and fit it to that base mesh. Well, here's kind of an interesting thing you can do in Mudbox. If I select the model and I go to export and export that selection out as an FBX model, for example, so that it's exported, not connected to Mudbox or Maya, and it's a raw mesh in that way. And then if I go, actually, we can do a whole new Mudbox scene here. What I could do is bring this mesh in, and I can hit rebuild subdivision levels. So you know what? I'm going to save that actually at the end because I don't want to lose these texture maps on here by starting a whole new scene. So let's just, for 1 second here, turn on some of the texture maps. I'm just going to deselect this model in here. And if we go to our mesh, let's hide this guy here, and I'm going to delete that object. And if I hit, actually we'll delete this object as well. Or actually here, go show all. And we do something interesting here now in Mudbox. If I grab this simple piece, you'll see in the menu we have duplicate object and the ability to flip the mesh. So if I hit duplicate object and then flip mesh, bring that up. We'll do it around X. I'm putting that on the other shoulder there. So that's really nice and quick and easy to work in Mudbox that way. Another thing in that menu for any Max users out there, there's also a simple little command here to flip Y to Z to Z up or Z up to Y up. So you can flip that around. That's pretty handy for Max users out there as well. So let's just hide all the curves. And if we isolate our guy here and then bring up our texture layers, let's display all the texture paint layers on this character. Turn off some of the masking. And then what I was doing in my workflow here to define some of these edges a little bit further is I was just quickly painting up a lot of the bump maps on here. So if we turn that on, you can see that we have some of these other little details that are simple bump maps painted up. So a lot of these little creases and lines along the details on the shoulders, and as well some of this under armor of the skin with these kind of bumps and details. And now this is a really interesting workflow here in Mudbox. At any time, I can convert bump maps to normal maps. So I'm effectively working with directly painting normal maps. So let's take this one here, for example, the normal map, or the bump map of this Under Armour, and convert it to a normal map. And we'll turn the bumps off of that Under Armour, and with the normal map now we're just working with a normal map. And we can see that if I solo this as diffuse, it's going to cull everything else out and just solo this simple little normal map. And again, there's no normals in this area that I'm displaying, just this area here with all the little scales and scallop kind of effect along this kind of under armor or under skin. So I can see how that's working. Well, now how do I keep blending with that? Well, that's the great thing about Mudbox is if I hit, let's unsolo that. Mudbox has a really tight relationship with Adobe Photoshop. Any of these texture channels I can right click on, and I can say export channel to PSD. So it'll bring the whole channel in a live connection with Photoshop, and I can change things and use all the tools in Photoshop and then have that translate right back into Mudbox and vice versa. So you can think of Mudbox as a 3D extension of Photoshop, or Photoshop as an extension of Mudbox here, which is really nice. And you'll notice that we have all these blending layers here. So all of these layers here, for example, if we turn off some of these guys, I baked out the ambient occlusion here, and I have that multiplying in. So if I put that back to normal, that's my ambient occlusion map that I was able to quickly bake out using my map extraction tools here in Mudbox. But then if I just hit multiply on that, I'm getting the overall ambient occlusion baked down to help me with that painting workflow. So we can do that with all of these different layers in here. Let's turn off that dry edging, so I want to show that there as well in a minute. But with the normal maps here, if I convert another one, we'll grab the carbon filter kind of effect, or carbon fiber kind of effect on his chest, and just bring that, change that over. And you'll see that that's overriding the other normal map if I turn this one off. We're not able to see the full details on that, but that's okay. We can solve that by using the blend method here by just hitting an overlay. Now we have essentially preserving the layer system, but combining all of these normal maps. And I can flatten that at any time. But of course, if you're familiar with Photoshop, it's nice to work with that layer system. Whether you're sculpting or painting in Mudbox, you want to preserve all that history. So let's take a look at something else here that's nice in Mudbox. If I go up into let's grab a new paint layer. I'm painting in 4K. All of these layers, all these different textures that you're seeing are 4K texture maps. And that's going to give me some nice resolution. And you can see I have these unlimited kind of texture layer workflow, these 4K maps. So in the paint tools, I want to go to my dry brush tool here. And I want to start to kind of weather up some of the edges on this armor. So let's grab, just so you can see it clearly over top of that orange, let's use a bright white. And what's going to happen here, if I turn mirroring on as well, just to able to duplicate my efforts here, the dry brush is only going to grab the high areas as I paint. So I don't want the lower areas, I just want the higher areas. And as I paint, we got to turn the strength rate up on that. So now I'm only affecting, let's make the brush a little smaller, I'm only affecting any of these high edges here. So as I paint and kind of rub that brush around, it's only grabbing the higher points, or the higher level of the plane. And this is great for providing that kind of damage or kind of weathered effect on here. And of course, at any time, if I want the opposite of that, I can hit Control, and it's only going to paint the lower level areas. So if you have a valley, for example, you can cut into that valley and get the opposite effect. So here's some of that dry edging. Here's actually a finished layer that I've painted up with a bunch of that kind of damaged dry edging on there. And then one other thing to show here with the texture painting workflow in our layer system, and we've seen how we can blend them all. If I right-click and go down to Adjust Color, we get this nice little handy Adjust Color window. We have a bunch of presets set in here. You can create your own custom presets. But we can change, I can start to change the color rapidly or really easily on the fly on this character, and I can start to adjust that. So maybe if we wanted some darker highlights on that, if I wanted to affect the overall color on it, want to affect the hue of this, maybe change it to something completely different. Let's bring it into some area like a blue, bring the saturation way up on it, and start to bring the value down and get something kind of like a little more kind of battle friendly in my opinion, something a little darker. So we can bring that in and then start to adjust color on any of these layers here. So we painted that guy up orange, now we changed into blue. And another cool thing with that is I can start to render out different representations of this character here. So if we show all of the pieces on here, yesterday I spent a little bit of time on the rendering here in Mudbox and how you're able to save out screen images. I'm not going to go into depth on that live right now, but just show quickly. I can render, I've actually rendered live out of here up to 16K images, and it's really fast. Let's just do this basic one here based off of my image. And if I go just to this default home drive and click save on that, I'm just going to call it test. It's going to save out a PNG, and as it's rendering that out, image saved. And the reason why that's fast for two reasons. We have in Mudbox here really quick ability to render really high resolution images, but also we're using these Intel solid state drives. We have a contest here at some point where we're giving some of those away. Definitely come by. You can win, I think it's a 480 gig solid state drive that we're just giving away, and they're super fast. So that's why it's really nice with the texture workflow here in Mudbox to be able to work with that. So one last thing I wanted to show before I switch it over to Mr. Russell over here. We talked about working that interesting workflow with the rebuild subdivision level. So I'm going to go don't save. I'm going to start a whole new basic scene here. And I wrote out a simple, where did I put that guy? Oh, where did I put that mesh in here? I don't even know where I've put it. Well, I can't find that mesh that I exported here earlier. Let me see, check one more place in here. Yeah, I'm not sure where I've exported that. I don't know why I can't see that in here. Okay, well, we'll save that for the next demo here. But in the meantime, with these render images here, I wanted to show some of the turntables here. And actually, before we do that, we talked about those vector displacement tools, creating hard surface vector displacement tools. These are just quickly created in Maya and then brought over to Mudbox and baked down. So I'm getting these nice undercuts of these things like these tubes. I showed how this one works here, so I'm getting that pushing down and pushing in to cut along the edges of the armor. This one here, especially for the edge of the armor, and this sharp edge, kind of really sharp bevel to get along the defining the creased edges of my hard surface. And these are just the simple profiles as to what they look like or how they're carving the surface in there. And then the last thing here, we looked at how we can render out some of these images directly out of Mudbox really quickly for the approval process or for art directors or creative directors. But we can also render out some nice simple turntables here. So here's just a sculpting process turntable that we can see live at a Mudbox, and here's a finished texture one. So you can use HDR lighting on it as well to preview it. I'm going to leave it at that, and I'll make sure for my next one I can find that high-res mesh here, and we can do a rebuild subdivision level down to show how you can bake out normal maps more accurately there in Mudbox. So coming up next, I believe we're going to show the reel quickly, are we? And then right after that, we're going to be getting into Maya with Stephen Russell, the very disease-free individual standing right over there. So he's going to do a nice little Maya demo for you, so please stick around for that. Thanks, guys.